Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about those people in your tree who have the same name as other people that exist. Now, some of you may know that you have people in your tree who have very common names. We'll look at one of my examples today in my family. His name is Dan Jones, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of men throughout time who have had that name. Some of you may have people in your tree with more unique names, and you may think that they're the only person who exists with that name. The reality is it's very likely, especially within their own family, that there are others who have the same or a similar name. And one of the things that we see happen a lot is that we merge or conflate two individuals, their lives. We end up mixing them up or confusing them because we haven't gotten really clear on the fact that those same named people are entirely different individuals. And so what we're going to talk about today is just some basic strategies that you can use. First of all, to discover if there are others with the same name, and second of all, to sort them out so that you make sure that you're attaching the right person to the right life events and to the right family members. Okay, let's go ahead and dive in. Let's talk first about how you know if there is more than one person with the same name. Now, this is going to be all about the genealogical proof standard. If you're not familiar with that, the very first principle of that standard for family history research is to conduct a reasonably exhaustive search. What that means is that you don't just do a quick search and grab the first thing that comes up in your search results, okay? A lot of times we tell the search engine what we want, and it gives us what we want, but we don't realize that we didn't have all the information we needed to make a decision about whether or not that was actually our person. And so I'm just going to walk you through a couple of examples of ways in which I search that yield more information. Now, conducting a reasonably exhaustive search encompasses a whole lot more than just Ancestry.com online searching. It means that you need to know what records exist in other places on the web. It needs to know you need to know what exists at other locations like libraries and archives and record repositories. I spend quite a bit of my time just reading library catalogs. I know that sounds incredibly exciting, but the idea is that I want to know what records exist in the world so that when I go to look for information about my ancestors, I know where to look. And so conducting a reasonably exhaustive search, if you want to do a Google search for that term, you'll find lots of really great articles that will help expand your understanding of that part of the genealogical proof standard so that you can become a better genealogist. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that today, but I just wanted to make sure that you understand that that is what we're talking about today. And so I'm going to show you one of the ways in which I meet that standard. So one of the ways in which I do that is when I'm looking for somebody, I search by their name and their name variants, and I search by a location, and I make sure I include adjacent locations. I include adjacent locations because boundaries are just lines on maps. There's no wall between, counties or between towns. And so just because you know your ancestor lived in a specific location doesn't mean that the boundaries didn't change around them, doesn't mean that they might have been, lived near a boundary. And so sometimes census enumerators or others might have gotten a little confused about which place they belonged to. Sometimes they did move back and forth across those boundaries or around in a location, and we might not have known that. I search by name variants because we know that our ancestors were not always recorded with their names exactly the way that we expect them to be. Just because you think your last name has always been spelled the way it is spelled does not mean that that's true. Names have changed over time and morphed. Sometimes the person didn't know how to spell their own name. Sometimes the census taker or the person writing down the information just wrote down what they heard to the best of their ability. And then, of course, with all of those handwriting variants, the people who transcribe the records sometimes transcribe it differently than what was actually written. So lots of different reasons why there are variables, and just because you find a person who has the name spelled the way you think it should be living in about the same location doesn't mean it's your person. And so these are the two things that I search by: a name and a location. Now I'm going to show this to you, and I want you to keep this in mind because this is how I do a lot of my searching. I'm going to go ahead and click on search. That's going to take me to the ancestry.com search page. Let me make this a little bit bigger for you here. Okay, now always make sure that you're using the advanced search form. Okay, that's super important when you do any search on Ancestry, that you're using that advanced search form. So make sure you click show advanced. If it says hide advanced, then you're looking at the advanced search form. Okay, now up here, I'm going to uncheck match all terms exactly. That's going to reset every one of my field filters, okay? And I'm going to type in a particular name. In this case, I'm looking for a man named Daniel Jones, okay? Now I could say match all terms exactly just to see what comes up and click search. Now I've got this filtered to only show me records in the United States, and I've got 78,000 results, okay? That gives me an idea of how popular this particular name is. Now, of course, I do have it marked exact, so I'm going to drag this filter back a little bit. I want not just exact and similar, I want exact sounds like and similar. What that's going to do is it's going to catch all variations of Daniel. It's going to catch Dan and Danny. It's going to catch places where it's been abbreviated DAN apostrophe L. It's going to catch all those variations for me. And I'm going to go ahead and click update on that filter. And now I'm up to 114,000. Okay, again, what I'm trying to do is just get an idea for how popular this particular name is in general so that I know what I'm dealing with. Okay, that's part of a reasonably exhaustive search, is to have an idea of what it is that you're dealing with so that you can craft searches that will get you the information that you need. Now, I happen to know that the Daniel Jones that the multiple Daniel Jones that I'm looking at all lived in and around Hawkins County, Tennessee. So I'm going to come in here and edit my search. And the field that I use just about more than anything, in fact, even more than a name field, is this lived in field. I'm going to go ahead and change that to lived in, and I'm going to put in Hawkins County, Tennessee. Okay. Now, that's important because what it's going to do is it's only going to show me records that have some connection to Hawkins County, Tennessee. Either the record was created there or something on the record says that, has that information on it, okay? And so then I'm going to go ahead and click search again. And now I'm down to 76, okay? By just putting in that one specific location. Now, remember what I said about locations, though. Boundaries are just lines on maps. My family, even though they lived in Hawkins County, Tennessee, I've been to Hawkins County, Tennessee. It is the most rural place you can possibly imagine, in the hills of Tennessee. And I imagine that they weren't always terribly clear on exactly what the county boundaries were. I also imagine there was a lot of migration in and around those hills. And so I'm going to dial this filter back one to county. And let me just highlight it there, county and adjacent counties, so that it gets Hawkins County, but it also gets any other counties that touch Hawkins County. And I'm going to go ahead and click update on that, and now I'm up to 271 results. Okay, that is a super manageable list of results, even on a name as popular as Daniel Jones. Now, of course, you'll see here I've got this sorted by category, not by record, because I want to be able to look at my search results by specific database. And I'm particularly interested in census records to start with. I just want to see how many different Daniel Jones we're dealing with in that particular location. Now, I can see here I've got an 1830 census. Looks like I've got some census substitutes, which are probably tax lists or voter lists. I've got an 1840 census and an 1850 census. Now, the 1850 census, as you know, was the very first census that recorded the names of every person in the household. So that's probably going to be the one that I want to look at first for this particular family, just to see, get an idea of what's happening here. So I have 7 men listed who are named Daniel Jones or some variant of that, who live in Hawkins County, Tennessee, or an adjacent county. In this case, Sullivan County, Tennessee, Scott County, Virginia, or Hancock or Greene County, Tennessee. So those are the counties that are adjacent to Hawkins County in some way. And so now I've got a list of 7 men here to deal with. Now, one of the things that you're probably going to notice very quickly is that some of these men have birth dates that are very close to each other. I've got an 1810, an 1813, and an 1816. So these 3 men are very close in age to one another. And that's important to know because how do I know which one is my guy? If I'm looking for a Daniel Jones born in about 1812, how do I know which one is the right person? I need to be able to keep these men separate, not just for the sake of my first search, but for the sake of all my subsequent searches. As I go looking for additional information about these particular men, I need to be able to keep them straight, okay? And maybe even these 2 guys, this 1828 Daniel Jones and this 1830 Daniel Jones. Depending on if the year is off, I want to go look at that original image, make sure it really says that he's as old as he is, not that somebody misread a number. Is he really 22 or is he 32? What was written on the original record, not just what did the transcriber who indexed the record write down, okay? So I have this group of men now here to work with, and I want to be able to keep them straight and sort them out. Now, I will probably go and look at every single one of these census records so that I can sort through these men. Prior to 1850, the census records don't give you nearly as much information, okay? They're still valuable, though, because we can see that the only Daniel Jones listed in 1840 are all living in Hawkins County, Tennessee. Even though I've asked to see adjacent counties, it looks like there weren't any living in adjacent counties. So that helps me start to understand that whoever these men were that were living in some of these other counties were either not the head of household in 1840 or they were living elsewhere, okay? And that's important to be able to follow some of those other men so that I can rule them out as being my people. And I'll just do that. I'll do that both directions here. I'll go to 1860 next. And every once in a while I'll just drag these so that they're in chronological order so that I can start to see patterns as I look through these records, right? All of my Hawkins County, Tennessee Daniel Joneses by 1860 are gone, right? They're not listed anymore. We've just got that Sullivan County, Greene County, and then Scott County, Virginia guys listed. That's important, again, important to know. Where did they go? Did they all die? Did they all move? Did they all move together? Could every one of these Daniel Jones living in Hawkins County be related to each other? Again, if I'm looking for my Daniel Jones, I need to know how the relationships work, not just that there are other men with this same name. So I'll do that a lot of times. I'll pull up every one of those records and I'll start looking for patterns that just pop out at me as I go from census to census looking through those particular records. Okay, again, 1870, nobody in Hawkins County. That tells me that they likely moved because I doubt that all 3 or 4 of the Daniel Jones that were living there died all in that same 10-year period of time. So that's part of what we call a reasonably exhaustive search. You'll notice I'm looking at information. I'm not putting anything in my tree. I'm not coming to any conclusions. I'm just looking at information about the people that I have searched for under a name and a location, and that's all, right? I haven't thrown everything at the search engine, which sometimes we do. Sometimes we see this search engine, this search box, and we feel like we have to fill out every single field. The problem is when we fill in every single field, the search engine's going to return us any piece of information that matches any single field we searched on. And sometimes that is not the best approach to searching. Sometimes the best approach to searching, particularly if we're trying to do a reasonably exhaustive search, is to look at limited pieces of more restricted information. So Daniel Jones, living in a specific county, and just see what comes up. Okay, and if I wanted to go back out and look at other records, I don't have to redo my search. I can just click here on all categories. That's going to take me right back out to my main search list. I can look at things like Tennessee burials to see if people died. I can look at disabled volunteer soldiers to see if any of them were affected by the Civil War. I can look through other records, early Tennessee tax lists, all sorts of things available to me here to see other connections to men named Daniel Jones. Now, I use the census as the framework, like I said, but then I'm going to be looking for other records to help me support that information and to start collecting that information. Now, once you end up with all of this information collected about all of these different Daniel Joneses, now you've got to start sorting them all out. And that's where I think it gets really fun, right? You start to see, again, patterns. Are you looking at the same 2 or 3 men over and over again? Are you looking at 4 or 5 different men? Is there a situation where one man has been enumerated more than once in the census because he has multiple families? Or is it a matter of 3 cousins who have all been given the same name as their grandfather? And so here's just one of the tools that I use to do that. I use spreadsheets. So I go into a spreadsheet program and I list life events down the left-hand side of the page, and then I list name variants across the top of the page. So in this case, I have 5 men that I have identified named Daniel Jones who are about the same age, living in about the same place, and here's how I have chosen to keep them straight. So I started with just this top information, right, off the census or off of the information that I had collected. I've got these 3 men in particular, 1810, 1812, and 1813, that would be really easy to mix up. And it's not just because their ages are so similar or that because their birth locations are all right near one another. It's also because every one of these men was married in the 1830s, mid-1830s, to women with similar names: Elizabeth, Eliza, and Elizabeth, right? So you can't even identify them just by their spouse's name. Oh, it's the Dan Jones married to Elizabeth. No, because we've got multiples of those as well. If I can't find information, I just leave that field blank because, again, it will help me start looking for patterns. Am I looking at the same person and I've just created an extra column here, or are these entirely different people? If you come down here to the bottom, you'll see I've got death information. Well, I know that this particular Daniel Jones shows up later in Jefferson County, Missouri, and I think he dies around 1875. This Daniel Jones dies around 1880 in Adair County, Missouri. So again, are these the same person? And I've just looked at multiple sets of information that report different things, or are these indeed 2 entirely different people? So another one of the things that you can look at is the children in each family. Now that gets a little trickier for a couple of reasons. Remember, prior to 1880, the census does not list the relationships of the people in any household. It just lists the people in the household. And so you could have a household, 1850, 1860, 1870, you could have a household of people that could be parents and their children, or it could be grandparents with some of their children and some of their grandchildren, or it could be, and I have one case where it's a single uncle and his sister, so an aunt and an uncle, and they have nieces and nephews from 3 of their siblings' families living with them and helping them work the family farm. And so it looks like at first glance, oh look, it's a husband and a wife and a bunch of children because they all have the same last name except one of the kids because it's a child of a sister. They all have the same last name. They're all about the right age to be, but it's not. Further investigation showed that this was actually a family or an aunt and an uncle with some nieces and nephews working the family farm. So don't assume from 1850, 1860, and 1870, just because you have children in a household, that those children belong to that couple, okay? You have to do further investigation. You have to go look at each of those children and follow them through their lives and see if their parents show up in later census records listed as parents to them, or follow them through to their death records or their obituaries to see if those list the names of their parents. follow some of these men to their death, see if there's a will or any kind of probate record or file that will list who their inheritors are, who their children are. All of that is necessary in order to put these family groups together. And only once you put these family groups together can you definitively say that you've got the right person, okay? Because if your ancestor was, if you're looking for the Dan Jones that is the father of your great-grandfather Samuel, is that going to be this Dan Jones who has a son named Samuel? Or is that going to be this Dan Jones who has a son named Samuel? Again, you're going to have to be able to sort out these families so that you know who these particular groups of people are, who these children belong to, okay? Is there really only one Samuel, or are there two Samuels? Are these two Samuel's cousins? Are these two Daniel's cousins and their children migrated around or lived with different family members at different times? That happened far more than you might think it did, particularly in some of these close-knit, tight-knit families who lived in isolated areas, who migrated together from, different parts of the country, across the country into places like Missouri and Arkansas and Alabama, okay? So I have then gone through, and over time I have added information about the children in each of these families, and that was what finally enabled me to look at this information and know that I did in fact have 5 different Daniel Joneses, that these were not 2 or 3 men who had been confused or mixed up, or that that these were unique individuals, that I was able to make sure that they were married to the right people. In this case, several of the children in this family listed their mother's maiden name. I actually have some property records between this Daniel Jones and some of Elizabeth's other family members with the same last name as her maiden name. This Daniel Jones, again, several of the children have their mother's name listed. Turns out she's actually a Jones. That's not a mistake. This Daniel and this Margaret are actually second cousins. And so again, we have a potential for some really mixed up, tangled up information if we don't keep it really clear. In these cases, I haven't discovered the maiden names yet of these women, but I've been able to positively identify these children as belonging to these particular families. So this is how I choose to do it. I just start a spreadsheet with life events down the left-hand side of the page, names across the top. You'll see every once in a while there are name variants. This particular guy has shown up in 2 or 3 different records with a middle initial of K. Haven't yet determined what that K stands for, but none of these other guys ever showed up with a middle initial, okay? That's another way to keep track of some of those variants. I have documentation to back up all of this information as I've collected it. I just keep it in a file folder, an electronic file folder on my computer. I don't print stuff out. I don't even write stuff up anymore. I just use word processing. Actually, I use OneNote and then spreadsheets. And so I keep all of this straight until I'm sure I have it all figured out. And then, once I have it all figured out, then I enter the information into my family tree. And that's important, okay? Once you get it figured out, then you can enter the information into your family tree. However, that you're not done, okay? I would strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you to take the next step. This is actually the final step in the genealogical proof standard, which is to write up what you've discovered. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a novelist. You don't have to make it too fancy. You're not writing for a genealogical journal unless, of course, you want to. But make some notes. Make some notes about how you came to your conclusions, and then include those notes or attach those notes to each of those people in your tree. So I would go into each one of those Daniel Jones and I would write up notes about why I know this Daniel Jones is this Daniel Jones, why I know this is his wife, why I know these are his children, why I know this is where he lived. So talk about why they are the person you think they are. What makes them unique out of all of the other Daniel Jones? And usually it's those relationships. Okay, sometimes it's an occupation. Sometimes I didn't include that on this particular spreadsheet because all of these gentlemen were farmers, but sometimes you can tell the difference between similarly named men because one was a blacksmith and one was a teacher and one was a farmer, or whatever the circumstances may be. So talk about why they are the person you think they are. What is it that makes them unique from all the other people who have the same name? And then maybe even include some notes about why they're not the other person. Okay? And you do that for yourself as much as for anybody else. You do that so that, 4 years, 5 years from now, when you come back or when somebody asks you a question, you can go back to your notes and you can say, here's why I came to that conclusion. And that's important because sometimes new information comes to light. Sometimes you've done your reasonably exhaustive search and you've come to a conclusion, and then new information that was not available before comes to light, and you can go back to your conclusion and you can say, oh, well, with this new information, I can see that my original conclusion was not exactly accurate. So I can alter it now based on this new information. But if you don't have any notes or any recollection of how you came to that conclusion to begin with, you might be a little bit at the whims of other researchers or at other records that come along. You want to be able to make soundly reasoned conclusions about why the people in your tree are in your tree, because of course we know that what we're trying to do is climb our own family tree, not someone else's. I hope that makes sense. I hope that has sparked your imagination about the possibilities that you have for doing really good, reasonably exhaustive searches with the tools that you have available to you. I hope you'll broaden your understanding of what records are available, broaden your understanding a little bit about what search possibilities exist for you to see what kinds of records even just exist online at ancestry.com. And then I hope that you've had some ideas come to you about ways in which you can correlate that information so that you can analyze it better, so that you can look for those patterns, so that you can make good decisions about who to include in your tree and who not to include in your tree. And then I hope that you will just write up information, and I just put it straight into the notes. There are person notes on every person in Family Tree Maker and in your online tree. Write up those notes about why you came to that conclusion so that you can defend that conclusion if you need to. You can alter that conclusion if new evidence comes to light. That is all I have for you today. If you are watching this at our regularly scheduled time, I will be on chat immediately following the presentation to answer any additional questions you might have. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.